We like to think of history as this nice, neat, straight line, a clear path from, say, stone tools all the way to smartphones. But every once in a while, archaeologists dig up something that just doesn't fit. An artifact that throws a wrench in the timeline and suggests our ancestors might have been dabbling in technologies way, way before we ever thought possible. So let's just jump right in with a pretty wild question. What if ancient people, more than 2,000 years ago, had figured out how to harness electricity? I know, it sounds like something straight out of science fiction, but there's this one strange little object that forces us to ask if it could actually be a fact. And this is where it gets really weird. This slide puts the whole mystery into perspective. On one hand, you've got this artifact, made around 250 BC. And on the other, you have Alessandro Volta officially inventing the battery in 1800 AD. That's a gap of over 2,000 years. It doesn't make sense with our neat and tidy version of history. So what is this thing? This so-called impossible artifact? Well, it all kicks off with a discovery that, at first glance, looked completely unremarkable. Picture this. It's 1936, just outside Baghdad. A German archaeologist, Wilhelm König, is digging at an ancient settlement and comes across these funny little clay jars. They were small, pretty plain, and honestly could have been overlooked. But what was inside them was anything but ordinary. So let's break down how this thing was built, because the assembly is so specific, it feels almost deliberate. You've got your outer clay pot. Then you slide a tube of sheet copper inside. And right in the middle of that copper tube, you have an iron rod, hanging there but, and this is key, not touching the copper. Then the whole thing is capped off with a plug of asphalt. Now, to you and me, that might just sound like a weird jar. But if you show that setup to any modern engineer, their eyes are going to light up. Because that specific arrangement, two different metals separated from each other, is the textbook design for something we call a galvanic cell, which is really just the technical term for a basic battery. And that single realization that it looked exactly like a battery launched one of the most exciting and controversial theories in modern archaeology, the idea that this little clay jar was actually an ancient power source. The theory is pretty simple. All you'd have to do is pour in an acidic liquid, an electrolyte, like grape juice or vinegar, stuff they definitely had plenty of back then, and boom, the chemical reaction between the iron, the copper, and the acid would start generating a steady, low-voltage electrical current. And here's the best part. It actually works. People have built replicas of these things many times, from serious researchers to TV shows like MythBusters. And when you fill them up, they produce about half a volt of electricity. Now, that's not a lot of power, but it's real, measurable, usable electricity. So if they had power, what on earth were they using it for? Well, obviously not for charging ancient cell phones. The leading theory, the one that makes the most sense, is that they were used for a process called electroplating, which is a fancy way of saying gilding, or coating one metal with another. And here's why that's such a big deal. The traditional way of gilding something involved fire and mercury, and it was messy. It often left thick, uneven layers of gold. But electroplating, using a low-voltage current, lets you lay down an impossibly thin, perfectly smooth layer of metal. And some ancient artifacts have this flawless gilding that just looks suspiciously modern. These little batteries could be the explanation for how they did it. I mean, it is a fantastic theory, right? It totally changes our understanding of ancient technology. But just when you're about to be convinced, the whole idea runs smack into a very, very simple and very big problem. And this is where the story takes a sharp turn. Because for every intriguing clue that points to it being a battery, there's a powerful counter-argument from the world of mainstream archaeology. I mean, think about it. To use a battery, you need to get the power out of it. You need wires, conductors, something to carry the current. And in all the archaeological digs across the entire region, guess how many wires or leads or any kind of electrical device from that era have ever been found? You see it right there. A big fat 0. None. And honestly, it gets even worse for the battery theory. The design itself has a fatal flaw. That asphalt plug at the top, it completely covers the iron rod. There's no terminal, no post, no place to attach a wire to complete the circuit. As a battery, it's a device with no practical way to plug anything into it. So if it's not a battery, what is it? Well, this leads skeptics to a much more boring but maybe much more likely explanation. They argue these weren't batteries at all, but were actually special containers for storing sacred scrolls made of papyrus or parchment. Let's just put these two ideas side by side. In the battery theory, every component has an electrical job. But in the scroll jar theory, everything has a simple, logical purpose. The clay pot is just a pot. The asphalt seal is a waterproof lid. The copper and iron, maybe just a frame to keep the delicate scroll from touching the sides. And that acidic liquid that could have been an electrolyte, well, that could just be the residue left over after a papyrus scroll slowly decayed over a couple thousand years. So, where does that leave us? Are we looking at a revolutionary piece of lost technology? Or is this just a classic case of us seeing modern ideas in ancient objects? Okay, when you lay it all out, the evidence for ancient electricity just feels pretty thin. The complete lack of wires or devices, the impractical design, it all seems to tip the scales heavily in favor of the scroll jar theory. But that doesn't completely close the book. It's totally possible that its electrical properties were an accidental discovery. Maybe some clever artisans figured out it did this one weird thing, like help with gilding, without ever needing to know the science of why it worked. And maybe that's the real takeaway here. The Baghdad Battery doesn't have to be proof of a lost civilization with advanced tech to be amazing. It's a testament to the incredible ingenuity and powers of observation of ancient people. So, what do you think? A revolutionary piece of lost tech that rewrites history, or just a beautifully preserved misunderstanding? Maybe the most fascinating part isn't what it was, but what it represents. A tiny, accidental spark of electrochemistry, waiting nearly 2,000 years for the rest of the world to catch up.